Have you ever had one of those moments where everything just flips? A decision you've been agonizing over for years is suddenly just made. A habit you couldn't break is suddenly gone. Well, today we're going to unpack why these huge shifts feel so abrupt and explore the idea that what feels sudden is actually anything but.
Yeah, that phrase, something snapped. It's the story we tell ourselves, right? It's how we describe a breaking point. One minute, things are holding together, and the next, they're just not. It's a story all about a dramatic, sudden shift.
But what if that's not the whole story? What if that feeling of snapping is actually, well, an illusion? What if the change wasn't sudden at all, but the totally predictable result of a process we just couldn't see? That's the big question we're digging into.
So first up, to really get this, we have to look at the stories we tell ourselves about change. I'm talking about the actual words we use, because that language really shapes how we see what's going on under the hood.
I mean, think about it. It happened all at once. Everything changed overnight. When someone says, "I just couldn't do it anymore," it sounds like a switch just flipped in their brain. But if we look at it from a structural point of view, that sudden switch isn't just possible, it's pretty much expected. Our words are great at describing the feeling of that moment, but not so great at explaining the mechanics that actually got us there.
So if it's not a sudden snap, then what is it? Okay, let's introduce the core concept that makes this whole thing make sense: the threshold.
You know, we tend to think of change as this gradual, linear thing, like pouring water into a glass. It just fills up smoothly. But that's not really how complex systems like us work. The idea behind structural cognition is that systems are built to maintain stability. They hold their shape, they hold their structure, right up until the moment they can't.
And this definition is just perfect. A threshold isn't a feeling. It's not a mood or a decision. It's an architectural limit. It is the literal point where the entire structure, the whole way the system is organized, can no longer support the pressure, the load that's being put on it.
Okay, but that leads to a really important question, right? If all this pressure is building up, why don't we feel it coming? Why does it feel like these thresholds just appear out of nowhere?
Well, the main reason it's so hard to see coming is that it's almost never just one thing. It's not the last straw that breaks the camel's back, it's the combined weight of all the straws that came before it. This is what we call the total structural demand.
And this load, oh man, it's messy. It's not a neat little checklist. Demands from your job, your family, your health, your past, they don't just add up one by one. No way. They stack on top of each other. They compound. And they interact in all these complex ways that are basically impossible to track consciously. The total pressure is always, always greater than the sum of its parts.
Now, what's really fascinating here is that the system does give us signals that it's getting close to a threshold. The problem is we almost always misinterpret them. We see someone putting in way more effort, or getting more rigid in their thinking, or repeating the same old patterns. And we think it's resistance or they're being stubborn. But really, those are all signs that the system is working harder and harder just to hold itself together against all that pressure.
And here is the absolute key to all of this. A system's number one job is to maintain its own coherence, to hold itself together. It's designed to protect its current structure, not to send you a warning that it's about to fail. So it will hold and hold and hold right up until the exact second it can't anymore.
And that brings us to a really radical and powerful way to reframe that moment of change. We call it collapse or a breakdown. But structurally, that's not what's happening at all.
I mean, just let that sink in. It completely changes things. It's not a moral failing, it's not a lack of willpower, it's a forced transition. The change happens because the old way of being stable is no longer an option. The system has to change.
So let's stop thinking about it as some chaotic breakdown. It's a precise, lawful reorganization. The system is just adapting to the new reality that its old form is completely unsustainable. It's actually a pretty brilliant survival mechanism, not a failure.
So what happens in those moments right after the threshold is crossed? This is where we tend to tell ourselves the wrong story about what just happened.
The reason it feels so jarringly sudden, like a dam breaking, is because that's pretty much what it is. All that invisible, accumulated structural pressure is finally released in a single instant. The internal change was gradual, but the external release, that's immediate.
And after the dust settles, we build these narratives to make sense of it all. We say, "I made a brave choice," or "I had a sudden moment of insight." But just look at the structural reality. The choice was made because holding on was literally no longer possible. The insight was just the threshold being crossed. The courage was the architecture finally reaching its limit.
And that huge feeling of relief that so often comes after a massive change, we assume it's because the new situation is so much better. But it's not necessarily an emotional judgment. It's a structural relief. The system is no longer burning a ridiculous amount of energy trying to hold together an unsustainable structure. The simple cost of being has dropped.
So, what's the big takeaway here? How does understanding thresholds really change how we look at our lives and the world around us?
Well, it helps us answer the one question that can absolutely haunt us after a sudden shift. Why today? Why not last week or next month? We search for that one specific reason, that final trigger.
And this model gives us a beautifully simple and powerful answer. It happened now, because the cumulative load just now reached the structural limit. Period. The timing has nothing to do with willpower or intention. It's all about the underlying architecture. And honestly, this perspective can be incredibly freeing. Someone's struggle is no longer a sign of personal weakness, but a sign of a system under enormous load. A collapse isn't some terrifying mystery, it's an intelligible transition. And sudden change stops feeling so chaotic and starts to look lawful, even predictable.
So I'll just leave you with this question to chew on. Looking back with this new lens, what moment of abrupt change in your own life can you now see wasn't a sudden snap at all, but was actually the quiet, inevitable crossing of a threshold?